One sound could wake a town, warn of fire, announce war, bless a wedding, and mourn the dead. One sound could control markets, meals, and midnight prayers. That sound was not a voice, it was a bell. And in medieval Europe, casting a single church bell was not just craftsmanship. It was power forged in fire. The church needed more than faith. In the medieval world, time was not personal. It was public. There were no wristwatches, no phone alarms. The bell was the clock, the news bulletin, and the emergency siren rolled into one. Monasteries divided the day into canonical hours. Towns followed that rhythm. When the bell rang for prayer, fields paused. When it rang for curfew, gates closed. When it tolled slowly and heavy, everyone knew someone had died. A single large bell could be heard up to several kilometres away, depending on terrain and wind. That meant one casting shaped the daily life of thousands. And because it carried such authority, it had to be perfect. Choosing the metal that sang. Medieval bell founders understood something remarkable. The voice of a bell comes from its alloy. Most church bells were cast in what we now call bell bronze, roughly 78% copper and 22% tin. That ratio was not random. Too much tin and the bell became brittle. Too little and the sound turned dull. This mixture created a hard, resonant metal capable of sustaining vibration for long periods. When struck, a well-cast bell produces multiple tones at once, including the hum, the prime, the tierce, the quint, and the nominal. Medieval founders did not use modern acoustic software. They relied on experience, ear training, and generational knowledge passed from master to apprentice. That is craftsmanship on a different level. Building the bell from the inside out. Here is where it gets intense. A bell was not carved from metal. It was cast using a complex mould built in layers. The process began with constructing a solid inner core made of brick and clay, shaped roughly like the inside of the final bell. This core was mounted vertically on a spindle so it could rotate. Rotation allowed precise shaping. Over this core, craftsmen applied a layer of loam, a mixture of clay, sand, horse manure, and sometimes straw. That might sound strange, but organic fibres help prevent cracking during drying and firing. Once shaped to exact measurements, the surface was smoothed carefully. This defined the inner contour of the bell. Then came the false bell. The false bell that never rang. On top of the core, the founders would construct a full-scale model of the bell, crafted meticulously in wax or a similar material. This was known as the false bell. Every single detail was etched here. The thickness, the curve, the inscriptions, decorative crosses, saints, dates, and even warnings. Everything you would see on a medieval bell was first sculpted onto this temporary layer. After that, another thick coat of loam was applied over the false bell. This outer layer formed the final mould casing, which was known as the cope. Once the mould was complete, the entire structure was heated. The wax of the false bell would melt away, leaving behind a hollow space between the core and the outer mould. That empty space was destiny, just waiting for molten bronze to fill it. The the pour that could not fail. Bell casting day was indeed an event. It was risky, expensive, and absolutely irreversible. The bronze needed to be heated to around 1,100 degrees Celsius. Too cool, and it simply wouldn't flow properly. Too hot, and the metal could oxidize or damage the mould. Founders relied on charcoal furnaces and massive crucibles, while teams worked in coordinated silence. When the metal reached the right temperature, it was poured into channels leading into the mould, which was often buried in a casting pit for stability. The ground itself became part of the foundry. One mistake meant disaster. A cracked mould could cause molten metal to spill. An air pocket could ruin the tone. And there were, well, no second chances without starting from scratch. Cooling took days, sometimes a full week. The metal needed to solidify slowly to prevent internal stress fractures. Breaking the mould and revealing the voice. Once cooled, the outer mould was broken away. This was dramatic. Imagine the tension. Would it ring true or crack under its own weight? The surface was cleaned. Excess metal was removed. The clapper was forged separately and attached inside. Tuning in early medieval periods was minimal compared to later centuries. By the late Middle Ages, founders began shaving small amounts of metal from the inside to refine pitch. It was delicate work. Remove too much, and the bell was ruined forever. Some large cathedral bells weighed several tons. A famous medieval bell cast in the 15th century weighed over 10 tons. Moving such giants required wooden scaffolding, ropes, pulleys, and dozens of labourers. It was engineering without modern machines. The ritual that gave it authority. Once raised into the tower, the bell underwent a blessing ceremony. It was washed with holy water and anointed with oil. Given a name. Yes, bells had names. They were treated almost like living guardians of the community. From that moment on, the bell was more than just metal. It was, the town's heartbeat. Different ringing patterns carried different meanings. A rapid peal could signal fire. A slow toll marked funerals. Continuous ringing might warn of invasion. People learned this language instinctively. You did not need to read to understand your bell. You just had to listen. Why one bell could organize everything. Think about it. Agriculture, worship, trade, defense, celebration, all synchronized by vibration. The bell tower became the tallest structure in many towns, symbolizing both spiritual and practical authority. Even markets were regulated by the bell. Trading began when it rang, and, ended when it rang again. Curfews were enforced by evening peals. In some regions, the word curfew itself comes from the practice of ringing a bell to signal people to cover their fires at night. That is social control through sound. And here is the wild part. The acoustic design of medieval bells was so advanced that many are still in use today, over 500 years later. Their tonal structure influenced modern bell-founding techniques. What this means for us today. Inside that casting pit was chemistry, physics, sculpture, teamwork, faith, and civic engineering fused into one object. Medieval communities invested enormous resources into a single bell because they understood something simple. Shared sound creates shared rhythm. Shared rhythm creates order. In our world of silent notifications and private alarms, it is easy to forget what collective time felt like. One bell, one voice, one town moving together. That is power. And that is why medieval bell casting was never just about metal. It was about identity. Here, at Ancient Roots Uncovered, we do not just look at artifacts. We decode how they shaped human behavior. The next time you hear a church bell ring, remember the fire, the clay, the molten bronze, and the hands that risked everything to give a town its voice. If this deep dive into medieval mastery fired you up, make sure you subscribe and share this episode with someone who loves hidden history. Ancient Roots Uncovered is where the past speaks loud and clear. And trust me, we are just getting started.